Welcome back to the 2021 Dyslexia Awareness Training Session. This is the second hour of the first session, and we're going to pick up at the standard 1.7, understanding the most common intrinsic differences between good and poor readers. And we're going to start by looking at 13 characteristics of dyslexia. So first, they may have difficulty in learning to read, write, spell, and they may also have difficulty in math. They may have difficulty in following oral and written instructions. They may have cramped and illegible handwriting. They may have difficulty in staying on task, and they may also be easily distracted. Many of our students have confusion in the sequence of letters and symbols. For example, B and D, the words quite and quiet, the words was and saw, and the numbers 18 and 81. And of course, these are just a few examples. And like Jada mentioned earlier with the myths, our students are not, it's not a vision problem. They are still learning to associate the sound of the letter with the visual shape of the letter. So when I hear the sound B, I'm still trying to associate the letter and the shape of it. And so it's not a vision issue. It is still learning that letter sequence. And then the same for the words like quite and quiet and was and saw. So it's not that they're reading it backwards. Their eyes are still being trained to learn that left to right progression. They're still learning that I start on the left and then I read to the right. And so hopefully that helps you understand, that it's not vision. It's not that they're seeing it backwards. They're just still learning the correct sequence. Okay, they may also have delayed spoken language, confusion about directions in space, time, right and left, up and down, north and south, even yesterday and tomorrow. Many students, they may struggle with their months, so they may know that I'm in October right now, but if I ask them, well, what month did we just leave, or what is the month coming up, they may not be able to tell you that. So that's just part of it. That's part of that confusion. Typically, they have a high level of frustration, especially the older they get. They just become familiar with that feeling of, I can't do this. They may have more of that attitude of giving up, and definitely the level of frustration is there. They typically have difficulty in retaining information. They have more than average test-taking anxiety. They may have an increased or reduced energy level, and oftentimes there's immaturity there as well. And just like the characteristics that we went over at the beginning, a lot of your students, they may just have some of these. They're probably not going to have all of them. All of our students with dyslexia are different, and they all have their unique needs and characteristics. So it's important to keep that in mind. Okay, so when we look at the fluency deficit is the inability to read with speed, accuracy, and proper expression. Children who do not read with fluency sound choppy, and it often sounds awkward. And this can impact their decoding, and it may need more practice with speed and smoothness in reading. So we know that fluency is one of those things that comes with practice. And I believe we'll be sharing some strategies to help with that later on. Okay, next we're going to look at comprehension. So here are 7 signs of reading comprehension problems. So first, showing no interest in reading whatsoever. They may have difficulty following basic directions, difficulty pronouncing or recognizing words. They may have issues understanding what was read to them, and taking a long time to solve basic tasks. They typically have poor penmanship and a family history of reading comprehension problems. So those are just some additional characteristics that you may see in your students. So here are just some different types of reading disabilities. So first is the deficit of the phonological deficit, and that's a core problem in phonological processing system of oral language. They may have trouble with their processing speed, the orthographic processing deficit, and that's the speed and accuracy of printed word recognition. And then comprehension deficit is specifically found in children with social linguistic disabilities. They may have vocabulary weakness, language learning disorders, and it coincides with the first two types of disabilities. So these reading difficulties can be discovered when analyzing a student's developmental history, when we look at their test performance, and we look at those reading behaviors that we mentioned. So here is an example of a developmental history form. And you see here, this is for ages 3 through 9. And our Office of Special Education has one that is for our older students that you can find on their website. But it's important for us as educators to understand that developmental history for the students, especially if you have a student that maybe didn't start to speak until they were 4. That's going to be important for you to know. If they haven't been around other children, if they've only been, at home with mom or dad, or if they have had some other assessments completed on them, if they've had some other issues in the past. So all of this is important information that you need to know as you're working with your students. Okay, here are some examples of reading behaviors. Applies word solving strategies to more complex multisyllabic words. So this is something that you definitely want to see. Reads orally with high accuracy in most instances, not stopping to self-correct errors in the interest of fluency and phrasing. So a lot of times our fluent readers, they just keep going, right? Because they're gathering enough meaning from the text. So they understand what they're reading and they just move on. And think about you as an adult. If you're reading a book, for pleasure or fun, if you come to an unfamiliar word, typically we just keep going, right? Because we're gathering enough meaning from the surrounding text. So it makes sense for us. And so our fluent readers begin to do that as well. After reading longer sections of text, they begin to predict outcomes. They start to think about their problem resolution, and they think about their characters and how their characters are developing throughout the story. They remember details and they sustain that attention to meaning through a longer text. So these are just some reading behaviors that we want to look for. We want to see our students beginning to exhibit these characteristics. Okay, so next standard, 1.8, know the phases in the typical development progression of oral language: phonemic awareness, decoding skills, printed word recognition, spelling, reading fluency, reading comprehension, and written expression. So this is the typical reading development progression. And I just went over those with you. So I want you to take a minute and look at that progression and think about this question. How do we support students at different points of development? So when you think about the students in your classroom, let's say you are a 3rd grade teacher and you still have students that are struggling in the phonemic awareness or the decoding skills, okay? So we know that we've got to support those students at that level. And maybe you're a 1st grade teacher and you've got students who have progressed through all of these stages, and now they're really developing their writing. So we know that we have students that are at all different levels, at all different grade levels, And as teachers, we have to support those students where they are. Okay, so let's take a minute and talk about decoding. That's the process of translating print into speech by rapidly matching a letter to its sound, recognizing the sound symbol correspondence in order to pronounce a word correctly. And then accurate word reading depends on the ability to decode unknown words by recognizing the sounds the letters represent. And so here is just an example of our students needing to read. Of course, they have to read their real words, but how can we decide if they're still struggling in this decoding phase? And so by giving them a list of nonsense words, we can see if they have the ability to decode them. Many times our students memorize basic sight words, and so we wouldn't be able to give them a list of familiar words to read because they may have memorized them already. So if we can develop a list of nonsense words, we can see if they have those decoding skills to attack those words to become fluent readers. And so this is just an example of some of those nonsense words you can use. Okay, next let's look at encoding. Encoding is the foundation of reading, and it's the greatest component of writing. It involves translating auditory sounds into visual symbols, and it really takes us from speech to print. And you may find that your dyslexic students really struggle in this component. They may be great writers as far as having great thoughts and they have great stories to tell, but they still struggle with that spelling component. And so that's our job, is to help them have the strategies so they can be better spellers, and so it won't impact their writing so much. Okay, so spelling, of course, is that encoding component. It's the construction of words, and it's the reverse of decoding. If decoding is sounding out those words, then encoding is putting them all together and writing them on paper. And so here is just a basic little word list. And I would encourage you with your spelling. I know many of you have your own spelling curriculum that you're using, but just keeping in mind that there's spelling rules. And a lot of times our students with dyslexia benefit from learning specific spelling rules. And so that may be something we can provide in the next session, give you some more examples on how to work with our students in the spelling component. Okay, KPS 1.9, understand the changing relationships among the major components of literacy development in accounting for reading achievement. So this is where that code emphasis instruction, if you are a dyslexia therapist or you work with a dyslexia therapist in your building, and there are some specific programs that use code emphasis instruction, you know the important role that it plays in the instruction for our students. And so it's instruction designed to teach children skills related to cracking that alphabetic code. It consistently demonstrates positive effects directly on children's conventional literacy skills, and it's most effective in small group instruction or a one-on-one setting. And that's why you typically will see it in an intervention type setting rather than a whole class curriculum. And it typically includes phonemic awareness activities. So it's taking it back to that foundational level, and then we're teaching students a code to help them decode and decipher those words. So the code emphasis instruction explicitly teaches phonemic awareness, phonics, alphabet, and print awareness. It's teaching all four of those components. Okay, so I want to take a minute and just break down phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. Phonological awareness encompasses a wide range of skills that lead to and include phoneme awareness. And this is one reason why I love this image. And if you've ever been to one of our trainings, we really emphasize phonological awareness because we do know that it is one of those foundational skills that our students need to be successful. And so you will often hear us talk about it and see this in our slides. But I really like this visual it helps me to see that phonological awareness is the encompassing skill, and then phonemic awareness just fits right into that. And phonemic awareness is where you have your sound substitution, your segmenting, your manipulation, isolation, and all of those skills fall there underneath that umbrella. Okay, so phonemic awareness is the conscious awareness of the identity of speech sounds and words and the ability to manipulate those sounds. It does not require the use of printed words or letters. It increases a student's awareness of the features of speech and it's being sensitive to rhyme. So here are some examples of onset and rhyme. The recognition and production of rhyming words depends on the ability to break any syllable into two parts. And so an activity that I often do with my students is have them, if I ask them to give me a word that rhymes with cat, and they may say bat. If I say, give me a word that rhymes with dog, they may say bog. They use that same sound over and over again in different word situations. So that's why it's important for them to generate a list. So give me a word that rhymes with cat. They may say bat. Then I'll say, well, give me another word that rhymes with cat. Then they say hat. So it really forces them to think of another consonant that they can put in front of that rhyme, a different onset to go with the rhyme. And if you haven't done this activity, even with your older students, you may find that they are still stuck in that one sound that they just use repeatedly. And so this is a good practice for them. Okay, syllables. Students should be able to segment and blend spoken syllables to remember, read, and compare longer words. And so that's why it's important for them to be able to break words down into syllables. And when you're working with students, especially when it comes to spelling, making sure, that they can break down that word into the syllable. It helps them to break it down into that smaller section. And so if I'm looking at the word basket, all right, well, first let's spell bass, B-A-S. Now spell ket. A lot of your students, and especially as they get older, they may not even be aware that they need to have a vowel sound within each syllable. And so sometimes that explicit instruction will help them, with their spelling. So that's just an example of why it's important to teach this syllable component in phonemic awareness, because it's going to help them down the road when they transition to print. Okay, another part of your phonemes, the individual speech sounds that distinguish words, and you see here where we just broke the word into individual sounds. Okay, and here are some tasks that you can do with your students. Which word does not begin with and then you would say the words hat, hair, wind, house. And then, of course, they would tell you wind. And keeping in mind that all of this is auditory. So we are not going into the visual letters yet. So this is not a list that they're reading. This is something that you are saying, and then they are giving you the response orally. Then say the last sound in rich, and then they would say ch. Put words together from their separate sounds. So if I say sh, ow, t, and then I would have the students say it fast, and they would say shout. All right, here are a few more examples. Say the sounds in crash, k, r, a, sh. And then I always have them put it back together, crash. And then we could also do some phoneme manipulation. Say the word heart, change t to d. The new word is hard. And then down here for your younger students, I put some visuals with it. You don't have to do this, but especially as your little ones, especially with the manipulation piece, it may help them to have that visual cue. Really thinking about your kindergartners here. So if I have the word fish and I take away what's left, and then the students would say ish. And then if I have the word rake and I take away r and add l, what's the new word? Lake. All right, so let's go back to your session 1 handout. And we are on letter G, and here are just a few phonemic awareness activities. So you can take this minute, pause the video, practice the activities with a partner, or you could do this with a student, but look at each section. So you've got segment words into syllables, segment words into sounds, and then some sound deletion. And of course, you can do the others that I showed you, some of that sound manipulation, some insertions, deletions. There are so many things that you can do with this, but I just wanted to give you a few examples on your paper that you could practice in the moment or when you finish this video. Okay, so looking at our sound symbol recognition, students are linking the look of the letter, the visual, with its sound, the auditory, and they are producing the accurate sound of each letter. And so now is when we're having that transition. We're going from the letter sounds to the actual shape of the letter. And then alphabetic knowledge is recognizing the 26 letters of the alphabet. Letter recognition, identifying the accurate name of each letter according to its shape and structure. And many of these are components of the dyslexia screener. I know we went over that at the beginning. And so a lot of these are activities that you can do with your students, maybe if they struggled on specific parts of that dyslexia screener. Okay, the next standard is looking at language comprehension. So once you have your word recognition skills, your decoding established, then it's time to look at your language comprehension. And so this is just the simple view of reading. I'm sure that many of you have seen before, and it's where we have our word recognition, we multiply it with our language comprehension, and that's what gives us the overall reading comprehension. So for vocabulary and oral language, it's an opportunity to nurture at an early age through read-alouds and classroom dialogue. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Our students need to hear you reading as a teacher. They need to hear you reading fluently with expression and prosody. And they also need to be part of your classroom dialogue, having those good conversations. And it may be where you are the facilitator and you're facilitating those conversations among the students. And it may be where you are engaged in that conversation. A lot of times our students, they love to hear stories from their teacher, and so it may be a sharing time where the teacher is sharing and then giving the student practice to share as well. It's really going to build up that vocabulary knowledge for the students. Okay, so here are some supports that we can provide through the years. We have our preschool year, so looking at some activities that you can do with your preschoolers, and not just preschool, but kindergarten, first grade, making those personalized books. I did that a lot with my first grade students. We would bring in pictures, and we would make their very own personalized books with pictures from their family or pictures from vacation, and even pictures that we have in the classroom. So also to increase that print awareness, we mentioned that at the beginning, that is so important for our young students. Choose rhyming books with high repetition of words, and dramatically pause to allow students to fill in the refrain as you're reading. That is one of my favorite activities to do with students with a rhyming book, where I'm reading. I might read the first part of the rhyme, and then when it comes to the second part, pause and allow the students to fill in the rhyming word. They love doing that. Okay, so for your older students, encourage a daily routine to help develop the student's own self-reliance and responsibilities. It's like I mentioned, we may have to lay that foundation for them, do some modeling, but then we want them to be able to do it on their own. They need to be responsible for, completing their work, turning in their assignments, but make sure that we explain on the front end what our expectations are for them. Encourage good organizational skills. Teach prefixes, suffixes, and root words to students to improve spelling, decoding, and comprehension. And that is very important as they get older and they're going into the upper grades, to understand that how a prefix or a suffix can change the meaning of the word. And that may take some explicit instruction. And then provide audio recordings when available. A lot of our students, they like to have that audio going while they're reading. So they may be reading the text and listening to it simultaneously. Okay, I am going to turn this back over to Jada, and she is going to continue sharing these standards with you.
We are going to pick up with Knowledge and Practice Standard 2.4. Students with dyslexia will benefit from evidence-based reading instruction, as any student will. Evidence-based reading instruction includes phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And it must be systematic, explicit, multisensory, and diagnostic for students with dyslexia. So what do we mean by systematic? Okay, well, with systematic instruction, skills are broken down into component parts. So once specific skills are mastered, then they are applied into meaningful text that students can read. Students learn the elements or building blocks of more complex skills, such as how to divide a 2 or 3 syllable word to facilitate reading, or how to recognize prefixes and suffixes in multi-syllable words before they are expected to read those words in content. Explicit instruction is straightforward instruction. It is obvious to the student, okay? It's a purposeful way of overtly teaching them. So when we provide explicit instruction, we clearly teach the skills that they need to know. We model, we provide guided practice and independent practice. We eliminate any guessing for the student, so everything is very straightforward. Multisensory instruction is not limited to reading and listening, such as other types of instruction. For multisensory instruction, students are participating in tactile experiences that will enhance learning and memory. So we're using visual, auditory, and kinesthetic tactile pathways to enhance that memory. Diagnostic teaching. We are utilizing our data to drive our instructional to drive our instruction, sorry. It's intentional. It's a process for pinpointing why a student is struggling and working to fix that deficit area, to overcome those barriers. It's discovering students' individual abilities and focusing on their abilities also. Teaching is based on careful and continuous assessment. So we're constantly assessing as we are moving forward with our instruction or intervention. The intensity, frequency, and duration of instruction or intervention should correspond to the degree of the dyslexia. So we talked about how dyslexia is on somewhat of a continuum. So students can have mild dyslexia, moderate, or severe. So we are going to utilize that information as we decide on duration and frequency. All right. Thinking about intensity and frequency and duration, we can kind of think about it as dosage, okay? No two students with dyslexia have exactly the same type of issues or react to treatment in the same way. So students are not necessarily going to react to instruction or intervention in exactly the same way. A student with dyslexia might know all of the information that they need to know to be ready to take an assessment the night before the assessment, and they may come to class and fail the assessment. And the parent may say, you know, he knew all of that information last night. And that might be true because, again, they can be inconsistent and sometimes they cannot retain that information to give it back to you on those assessments. So those skills can fluctuate, honestly, from day to day. So one day you may see them be able to do something and do it with mastery, and the next day they may be unable to complete the same task with mastery. All right, rapid automatic naming is an early predictor or an early indicator of reading ability. It is the ability to quickly name aloud a series of familiar items. It is something that we utilize to, again, it kind of predicts that fluency. But one thing that I wanted to point out in bullet 1 where it says familiar items, we want to make sure that we are using things that the student is familiar with. So we would not use the alphabet, for example, if the student did not know the letters of the alphabet. So you may want to use colors if they know the colors. I have used a rapid automatic naming item before that included objects such as plates, cups, spoons, things that they are definitely familiar with. So this can help you detect that slow processing speed. All right, standard 2.5. We're going to talk a little more about how symptoms of a reading difficulty can change over time, and also, again, how response to development to instruction and intervention can be different. So according to the CDC, the connections in a child's brain are most adoptable in those early years. So with early intervention, many children at risk for dyslexia can become skilled readers. Instructional priorities should change as a student's literacy develops. So that goes back to that diagnostic teaching. So I'm changing my instructional priorities as they are developing. I want to make sure again that I'm looking at which goals for these students would be priority, and also thinking about which goal will have the highest impact. So what is it that I want this student to be able to do that will give me the biggest, say, bang for my buck as far as helping the student to become a skilled reader? All right, some strategies in assisting our students. One thing that we can do is keep copying to a minimum. So we might want to provide notes for the student. In some situations, students can take notes, but maybe they need partial notes. Maybe if we leave out some key words for the student, and as we are having the lesson, the student fills in those key words. Maybe we want to give them an outline of some type. there's different ways to help the student as far as minimizing that copying. Sometimes we ask students to copy assignments from the board, to copy their homework assignment in a planner. It may be that some students with dyslexia are able to copy the entire assignment and copy it correctly so that when they get home, they can read it in its entirety and understand what is to be done for homework. But there are some students who may have difficulty getting the correct information down from the board. So you have to kind of know your students. Of course, all teachers know their students, but as we do know our students, we'll know which students may need some assistance getting those assignments down. Maybe it is that the students can begin to write the assignment, and then maybe as teacher, I complete the written assignment, the writing of the assignment for that student. And also I check for accuracy to make sure that everything is written as it should be. Some students may need me to scribe the entire assignment for them. Allow students to make predictions when they are reading. So they're going to preview books, they're going to preview titles, chapter names, and bold-faced text. And while they're previewing the book before they read, they're going to make predictions. And these predictions really allow them to check for understanding while we are reading. This can be utilized in upper grades as well, as we are using subject area text as well to preview those texts so that we can check for understanding as we read. Encourage students to visualize a mind movie while they're reading. So we talk to them about playing a movie in their mind of what they are reading about or what is being read to them. This visualizing boosts comprehension for the student. Encourage multiple readings of text. I know that students with dyslexia typically do not really, let's say, enjoy reading, for example, because it's a struggle. So they will avoid reading sometimes. And when you talk to a student with dyslexia and you say, okay, we're going to read this text again, and sometimes they'll say, oh, not again. But we have to talk to them about the importance of that multiple readings, because they're going to become more accurate when they reread. They're going to become more fluent as they reread. They're going to become more aware of what the text is about, the content of the text. I want to provide visuals for students as much as I can. Visuals work for your struggling readers. Visuals also work for students who are English learners, who are new to us, who are learning our language for the first time. They can use visuals to take notes on, okay? So they can use things like storylines, webs, maps, and different students will react to different types of storylines, webs, and maps differently. So you kind of have to find the one that fits that student and helps them the most. Encourage students to use a line guide. If he or she has trouble with skipping lines or skipping sections of text, then line guides are great things to be used, great tools to be used in the classroom or at home. These can be made available to everyone in the classroom, and students can just go get one from the classroom, and if it's housed in a certain spot, whenever he or she feels that they need to use them, so that they're available to all students and not just to students with dyslexia. All right, visuals help move that information from short-term memory to long-term memory. So I can give visuals to help students to decipher words or to see the difference in those words that are commonly reversed. I think I just said words and not letters, and I just had to think about that for a second. But let me say this one more time. Giving those visuals helps them to tell those words apart, those letters apart that are commonly reversed. All right, some daily strategies. I want to encourage good organizational skills. Use folders and dividers. You might want to use a large binder that contains folders and dividers. hole punch things when they are handed out to students. Let them hole punch and place things in the correct location in their folder or in their binder. Ensure that the student has appropriate worksheets available or appropriate text. If we're reading a chapter book, make sure that they have the appropriate chapter book available. It might be that I need to send home an extra copy of a text or a chapter book or something, a handout, for example. We have to have some patience when things are misplaced because we know that students with dyslexia are sometimes disorganized. We want to have daily routines and daily procedures so that there's no guessing involved as to what will come next during our days and what our routines and procedures are. Right, using manipulatives, those tactile things that we can actually touch. We can use manipulatives for mathematics. We can also use manipulatives for literacy practice, for reading practice. Manipulatives are good when we're practicing with time, money, or fractions. When spelling, we can count the number of sounds in a word and then correlate the sounds with letters. We could also do this with colored blocks or colored chips or colored counters. We can count those sounds in words. Explicitly teach phonics rules and review those rules. We can group words into similar families with multiple patterns of each phonetic sound. And you see here, one of the things that is used is those paint chip cards that looks like it comes from a local hardware store. So that's something that you could ask to be donated. That would be very budget friendly. All right, when writing, brainstorm key vocabulary prior to writing. Group nouns, verbs, and adjectives together to ensure students are using a variety of words. It might also be that when the student is writing, you ask the student to record or write the nouns in a certain color, pencil or pen, or they may circle all of their verbs, or they may underline all of the adjectives. Emphasize the need to write in stages rather than completing a long narrative in one sitting, because this will help increase the efficiency as students plan and organize. So they're going to be able to plan and organize more effectively. It might also be that we let the student record the piece of writing and then we scribe for them if need be. For some handwriting strategies, encourage students to study their own handwriting so they can make decisions as to what needs to be practiced. We always say that a cursive join style is more beneficial and more helpful for students with dyslexia. We want to discuss the advantages of good handwriting. And sometimes we can improve that penmanship by using pencil grippers or using larger pens or pencils, some type of raised paper. So some things that we've utilized, I know that I've used sandpaper in the past, and then a crayon writing on sandpaper really provides that good resistance. Some students can write beautifully on a white dry erase board with a dry erase marker. But then some students will prefer some type of chalkboard with actual chalk because that gives them that resistance more so than that white dry erase board. So it's good for them to understand what they need to practice as well, so they can identify those items. So at home, parents can encourage that cursive writing. They can practice those spelling procedures. Parents need to have good oral communication with their child. Of course, we as teachers need to have great oral communication with our students. We can utilize that time as teachers, even walking to and from the cafeteria, in the cafeteria, the playground area, waiting on the buses when we're in the bus line, or waiting for cars at Car Rider, between bells. Anytime that we can communicate effectively with the student, we're going to build those vocabulary skills. Some other at-home strategies that parents can utilize, of course, playing games. This opens up lines of communication, and playing those games helps build that self-esteem. And tell a parent, they're going to have to practice. The students are going to have to practice. Sometimes they're going to have to practice more so than others, but also helping parents to understand when their child who is struggling kind of comes to that place where they're done for the day, okay, where they're done for the afternoon, where we kind of have to move on from that practice, because we don't want to cause the opposite of success and have them feeling unsuccessful or anxious or upset. And we know sometimes when they get tired, it's just time to have that break. Okay, we can use pipe cleaners. Sometimes we call these chenille stems to practice letters and sounds, so we can actually create letters and practice letters and sounds. We could create entire words with these letters. We can also use craft sticks to, we can use a straight craft stick and then add the letter beads to the craft stick to create letters on the stick itself. If the child doesn't know letters, you can utilize colored beads, and you can identify sounds, and the child can point to each colored bead as they identify a sound. So if the student is repeating the word at, and you have an orange and a blue bead, they can point to the orange bead as they say ah, and the blue bead as they say t. So it's basically what we call sometimes sound counting. You can utilize sand in a pencil box. You can pick up pencil boxes at, say, the Dollar Tree, for example, for $1. They can write in the sand. You can give them in the top a sticky note that shows what word you want them to write or what phoneme you want them to write. They can say the word out loud as they write it, or say the sound that is made. Also, an alternative to this, we can put colored hair gel in a Ziploc baggie. And once you have sealed it tightly, it can be flattened on the desk, and then the student can use their finger to write on the outside of the baggie, and it will show up in that colored gel what they are writing. All right, we can use Legos or Duplo blocks or any other brand, of course, to create words, to manipulate words. Some scaffolding ideas. We can actually, we could write an entire suffix on one Duplo block or Lego instead of having the different letters that create the suffix. For our older students, we could write Latin or Greek roots on these building blocks and have them to create words and break words apart, manipulating them. Using clothespins on a clothes hanger will help with reading skills, as well as that hand-eye coordination. And it'll also improve strength, that hand strength for some students who might need that while we're working on those reading skills. These hangers can be stored easily. We can create words on these hangers. We could put the entire alphabet on these hangers. We could have students remove certain letters from the alphabet. Once we have put the letters A through Z on here, we could ask students to remove all of the vowels at one time. There are so many different things that you can do with these hangers. You could practice the student's name. Play-Doh or modeling clay or something like this will also build that strength that we were talking about in their hands while they're working on those literacy skills. They can create words, they can create individual letters, they can practice their name. Even adults enjoy working with Play-Doh. We did a training several weeks ago in a district and we utilized Play-Doh for an activity. And everyone got really excited when the Play-Doh came out because everybody loves playing with Play-Doh and everybody wants to pick their color that they want, their favorite color. All right, before we move to session 1 handout, I just want to say we don't have a slide for this, but I wanted to kind of go over some things that we can do, some strategies we can do for older students. Make students aware of their strengths and weaknesses for sure. Help them with self-advocacy. Help them to understand how to communicate with teachers, teacher assistants. Help them to learn how to communicate in person as well as creating emails if they need to communicate to ask questions. Help students to understand how to self-check themselves about the time that they've utilized on an assignment, for example. Help them with that pacing. Teach them to know so that they can identify when they need a break or a little time out so that they can refocus. We're going to have to model organizational skills and then model them again. And this is for students of all ages. All right, so session 1 handout, we're on section H. List 2 new strategies that you can implement with your students after watching this video. If you want to take a break and pause the video at this point, you can. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to Laurie, and she's going to review and then close out hour 2 of session 1.
Okay. The knowledge practice standards 1 and 2 were covered during the session. Feel free to reach out if you have any specific questions, and we want you to keep the session 1 handout for a resource. So this is something that you can use to help you to go back and reflect on these 2 hours of your training session. Be on the lookout for the next 2 hours. So session 2 will contain hours 3 and 4 of the dyslexia awareness training, and that will be coming out in November. We are currently in October. October is Dyslexia Awareness Month. And so we just encourage you, be patient with your students with dyslexia and, have that kind word and think about some of these strategies that we shared with you today. We really wanted to provide a lot of different approaches and strategies that you can utilize with your students. And so I'm going to show you the resources that we utilized for this. We used a lot of information from the International Dyslexia Association, as well as ASHA, the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. Reading Rockets provided a lot of valuable information. John Hopkins Medicine, the International Dyslexia Association, like I mentioned, Literacy for All Instruction, Reading Rockets, Heggerty. We were told that a lot of the phonemic awareness activities are also activities that they utilize in Heggerty. So if you're not familiar with that, definitely research that website. Pearson Higher Ed, Frontiers in Psychology, Orton Gillingham Online Academy, Great Speech, and of course these Reading Rocket resources. And on each individual slide, you will see the resource that we use. So if you're not sure about something that we shared and you see a link there, definitely go to that link and do some further research if you need to. We also utilize Scholastic and then Developing Early Literacy, the report of the National Early Literacy Panel. All right, here is my email address. So if you have specific questions from our office, feel free to reach out to me, lweathersby@mdek12.org. Jada is jbrantley@mdek12.org. So you can definitely feel free to reach out to either one of us. I want to show you, we have about 5 minutes left of this session. Look at letter I, it's the last section. It says, we have discussed many ways to support your students. Take the next 5 minutes and reflect on students that you have taught or you are currently teaching that could benefit from this specific instruction. So we are going to stop the recording now and give you that 5 minutes of hopefully quiet time so you can reflect on your students and the supports that you can provide for them.